Hey everybody, welcome to week 7. Hope that you're all doing well. We got a beautiful weekend this past weekend and looking like some good weather coming up, I believe. So enjoy it while you can. Plus, we had the time change, so that's cool. I think most people tend to like it when it stays lighter later. But so a couple things. Also, congrats on getting past test 1. So you know how those work. And you'll have 2 more of those coming up. So you don't, like I said, have a midterm and a final. You have test 1, test 2 about at the 2/3 mark, and then test 3. And they're all the same. They just cover the chapters that you've been learning there to reinforce what you're learning through the quizzes. And that's all good information. Really, the main things for me is those reflection observations. That really shows me what you're learning and all of that. So hopefully you're taking those seriously. Still running into some folks that are doing them at the last minute. Still running into folks that aren't getting to their welcome videos early. Please read the assignment comments that I leave for you, because it's important that you, I leave those to help you, right? If you're doing great and you're nailing it, it'll just say good job, great job, whatever. If there's things that are missing, then you need to do that. And it's really, again, important that you're going through the online materials and you're going through the textbook. So when I say, hey, make sure that you include examples from the materials, I mean the online materials and the textbook. So those songs that have listening guides or other songs from the playlists, make sure that you're listening to the music. That's really going to inform things. And some of you have started to notice that the assignments are getting a little more involved and the grading is getting a little tougher. And that's by design. I want to make sure that you are understanding what you're learning. And again, also don't plagiarize, all that good stuff. So we have reached the foundations of rock and roll. We've gotten to soul and Motown, so we're seeing how things split. And this week is a big week for the class because of a couple of reasons. One is it's going to, for the first time, really leave the United States. And you're going to learn about the beginnings of the British invasion. You're going to learn specifically about 2 bands, the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. And it's important to know that we could easily do a semester just on the Beatles, just on the importance of the Beatles alone. And we could do a semester on the Rolling Stones. That would be pretty easy to do as well. So the fact that we've got to cover them in a week to lay that groundwork, gives you a good idea of their importance, that we just are covering the 2 bands this time. So we've talked about game changers. We've talked about game changers in terms of technology and producers and artists. We talked about Elvis, who was an important game changer, right? We've already gone through that. The impact that he had musically, the impact that he had racially, the impact that he had societally. Those were a really big deal. But again, Elvis was just an entertainer. He didn't write his own material. And so when we get to the Beatles, without a doubt, are the most important rock band in music history, in popular music history. And there's a number of reasons why, and you're going to learn that in the materials. And I want you to, I could spell it all out for you right now, but then you don't have to go through the materials. So where's the fun in that, right? I want you to go through the materials, and I want you to think about their career, the things that they did going back to the beginnings of it with the Quarrymen, then through Jerry and the Moondogs, the Silver Beatles, and then the Beatles. You're going to learn about the influence of American rock and roll on them, and you're going to learn about the influence of particularly Buddy Holly and the Crickets. And you're going to understand their roots, where that comes from. Skiffle, which was also had American influences in it. And then what they did musically. And when we talk about the important game changers in my class, when I would teach the face-to-face class, I would list out some names, and I would put Elvis at the very top. And then underneath that, I would put the Beatles and Bob Dylan. Now, to understand the importance of the Beatles, too, you also have to understand the influence of American music on that, not just American rock and roll and rockabilly and all of that, but also the influence of the Beach Boys on them. So the Beach Boys were extremely influential in the progression of the Beatles, and they ultimately became friends, but they were challenging each other artistically. So you could actually look into kind of the first half of the 60s into the middle of the 60s in particular, and watch as they go back and forth, and they're pushing each other. So when the Beach Boys hear Rubber Soul, and then Brian Wilson pushes it even farther and gets to it creates Pet Sounds. And Pet Sounds was a big influence on Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. So without one, you wouldn't have had the other. Again, nothing exists in a vacuum, right? Say it all the time. And so, that's what we're talking about here. So when you think about what the Beatles did, and the other big influence on them is Bob Dylan. And Bob Dylan really influenced the Beatles because remember, up until this time, up into the early 60s, most pop bands did not write their own material. You had people that wrote them. You learned about the Brill Building. You had folks that wrote songs, and then they found artists to perform them. And that's when we talked about A&R men, artists and repertoire, and all that kind of stuff. With the Beach Boys, it was different. Brian Wilson is still alive, a musical genius. He was influenced by rock and roll. He was influenced by certain jazz harmonies, and particularly the Four Freshmen. And then he started creating his own songs and creating his music, and as an artist, and I talked about, an artist before, Brian Wilson, definitely an artist, in that he went the way that he wanted to go, the way that he was driven artistically. And that influenced the Beatles, and Bob Dylan the same. And so Bob Dylan and the Beatles met in 1964, and you're going to learn about the influence that they had upon each other. So again, I'm not going to lecture for this because this isn't, an online class, but I will tell you that the answers are in the book. Okay, they are there. They're in the materials. They're in the videos. But you have to dig in and work. Your reflection observations and your discussions, it's actually not difficult to get full points for them, providing that you've gone through all the materials. So you have to go through that, and then you're going to understand what factors made the Beatles, what factors made them popular, how they changed artistically, and then the influence on them still exists to this day. We saw with the popularity of the video, and I threw some trailers in there for the recent movie documentary Get Back, so that you can understand that if you haven't watched it and you have access to it, make the time, take the 8 hours or whatever it is over a few days or whatever, and watch it. It's a little bit of a slow start, but when you watch the whole progression, it's amazing. And to get a chance to watch artists do what they do, to watch these songs that just kind of appeared seemingly out of nowhere, but you're learning about artists that are at the top of their game, and there's a reason why, and you're going to learn about all the factors that led to that. You're also going to learn about the Rolling Stones. Now, there are, and I want you to think about the importance of the bands. And when I tell you that the Beatles are the most important band ever, that can be objectively made. What I'm not trying to tell you is that they should be your favorite band. There are a number of British invasion bands. So really at the top, you have the Beatles. The Beatles broke down the doors for the rest of them. So when people say, well, I think that the Rolling Stones are more important, there's no way they're more important, because they would not have been able to break through if it weren't the Beatles. And in fact, if there were not for the Beatles, the Rolling Stones wouldn't have started writing their own material. And at this time, a lot of these artists, and you'll learn next week about the Kinks and the Who, a lot of these groups, they all started off as cover bands, because that's what you did, right? Most of them couldn't read or write music, and they learned songs the good old-fashioned way. You would listen to them, you would figure them out, you would play them. When you do that, when you learn music that way, you really get to learn the songs from the inside out. And so that's what happened with the Beatles and the Stones and the other bands. And then they started writing, because the only way that you were going to have any longevity of a career was to start writing your own songs, because that's where the real money is made. It's not in performing other songs, because then you're just basically getting paid to play. The royalties that you earn from writing songs is where that comes in. Now, the Stones were a little bit later than the Beatles, just by a year or two. But what's important about the Stones, by a year or two, I mean also the Beatles didn't become the Beatles until like 62. It took a little while to get to the final John, Paul, George, and Ringo. That really coalesced there. The Stones came out a little bit later than that. And but the Stones were very much, while the Beatles were into rock and roll, the Stones their foundation was American blues and soul. So their roots, if you will, were very different. And so what they were drawing from. And I would always tell people in my classes and otherwise that to me, the Rolling Stones are the greatest American band that happened to come from England. Their entire foundation with the blues and country in particular. And when you start listening to the Rolling Stones, you will hear those influences, especially as they continue on after Brian Jones leaves the band and all of that. You will hear that that is their foundation. They also loved Motown. They loved soul. So you will hear those come in where the Beatles were a different kind of band. You don't hear those influences so strongly. The Beatles were really their own thing. So that's it for now. Make sure that you do the work. Make sure that you understand what's being asked. You can always reach out to me. If you're not sure, if you're saying, hey, I'm thinking about this or whatever, and you can message me in Canvas, I'll write you back, let you know if you're on the right track. What I won't do is read your whole assignment for you and let you know, yeah, that's good, no, that's not. But if you're like confused about something and you want some clarity, then reach out to me and I'll help you. And in fact, I wanted to just share something. I didn't think about this, so again, you're going to get a back of my head moment here. But an amazing book that I highly recommend everybody reads, and it's easy to find because it's got a red cover. Is this book called How the Beatles Destroyed Rock and Roll. And I got this book, and at first I thought it was kind of interesting, and I was like, wow, this must be like an anti-Beatles book or whatever. It's actually not that at all. What it talks about, though, is the progression of the Beatles from a young rock band, cover band. I don't use the term boy band, and I know that people have a tendency to do that, and I get a little frustrated when even students, after I've done these videos, and they'll refer to the Beatles as a boy band, and I'll explain to you why they're not a boy band. So a boy band is a fabricated band, almost never plays music, plays their own instruments. They're primarily a vocal band, and you can think of lots of boy bands out there, whether it's One Direction or BTS. These are like more contemporary ones, but they're put together. They're often auditioned. One Direction's a perfect example. And by the way, this is the case even if you go back to Backstreet Boys and NSYNC, and these go back even into the 70s with the DeFranco family, and they have, their roots, they go back quite a ways. But they're fabricated bands or groups, if you will. They audition. There's usually an impresario kind of figure. So for NSYNC and the Backstreet Boys, there's a guy named Lou Pearlman. And they would audition. For One Direction, it was Simon Cowell that actually put them together. They had all auditioned, for one of the talent shows. And I don't remember which one it was, X Factor or something. But they didn't really do so great. But Simon Cowell saw something in all of them. He put them together, and they became a group. So that's what a boy band is. The Beatles were not ever a boy band. Were they a band made up of young men? Yes. But they were not fabricated. They came about naturally. They became friends. They went through the processes that bands go through and finding other members and cycling through. They were not created by a label to sell records and all of that. So please don't ever use the term boy band when you're talking about the Beatles, because they weren't that. But they were a young cover band, rock band that started creating their own music, and then they started creating more sophisticated music. And so what they ended up doing basically was moving from a rock and roll band. Think about, Elvis and what rock and roll was, Chuck Berry, Little Richard, all that sort of stuff, to a band that had created a different style, much more sophisticated. Rock and roll was made to dance to make out to party to, whatever. By the time you get to the mid 60s with the Beatles, they're creating pretty sophisticated music that was designed for you to sit down and listen to it. When you take a song like Eleanor Rigby, which has just got vocals and string octet, that's not a rock and roll band by any means, or a rock and roll song. So I highly recommend, if you're interested in the Beatles, get this book. It's a great read. And so that is it. I'm going to leave you now. Please do good work. Take the time. Make sure that you follow the instructions for your reflection observations. I ask you to copy and paste the prompts at the top. Please read the assignment comments that I leave for you. So if you're not doing that, you'll do that. And I do that for your benefit. So you can read those questions one last time and make sure that you're answering them. Ideally, I want the prompts at the top and then your reply below. I don't want it all blended together. I think that's it. Have a great week. Spring break is coming up in a few weeks. So you're almost to the halfway point. Hang tough, and we'll talk soon.